Hello and welcome back. It's finally here. Fantasy playoffs begin for most of you in week 22, and now is the time to focus up and give your team the best chance to make it to the next round. So, in this video, we'll go over the schedule, some of the best ads this week, and goalie streaming options for the week. But before we jump into the schedule, just a quick reminder. If you filled out this draft strategy form earlier in the season, please remember to come back when your season is done and input where you finished in the standings. Otherwise, this data will be invalid and we won't have what we need to prepare for next year's draft. So I'll try to send out a reminder email to everyone who filled this out. Just wanted to mention this quickly. Let's do the breakdown that we always do for the schedule on week 22. 51 games this week, 14 on Thursday and Saturday. So obviously you're going to want some exposure to those light nights. Obviously the light nights Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then kind of Sunday. You've got 7 games on Sunday night, but the only game on that Friday is Columbus versus Pittsburgh. Both have 3-game weeks, but Pitt plays on Friday and then they have Sunday, but they're in Florida. So they can give you some Friday, Sunday exposure in terms of you try to pick up a guy with 3 and 4 in the front half, maybe a guy from Calgary for this 3 and 4, and then you drop them and then grab a Pittsburgh player for Friday, Sunday. You could get the 5-game week out of that. In terms of some of the best schedules, you're looking at the strength of schedule mixed in with a little bit of opinion here. So St. Louis has a relatively good schedule here. They've got 3 home games of the 4, even though they do play 3 and 4. All of these are home, so that's going to be helpful to keep them rested instead of some of these teams that play 3 and 4 front loaded with all these travel days in between. So for St. Louis, Nashville, you've got Vancouver, Chicago, and Nashville again. That's really favorable for them. 3 of those 4 teams are below 500 and probably out of the playoff picture. You've got Toronto. They've got the Monday, Wednesday light night setup, so that might be preferable for you. There's not a ton to choose from off the waiver wire in terms of offensive players, but you can get some hits and blocks options. Simone Benoit, Chris Tanev back in the lineup. We'll go over some of those options. Then for Boston, there are a number of players who came over, guys like Casey Middlestat, that you can get exposure to Pasternak through. And they play the backloaded 3 and 4 with travel, so that's not as favorable, but they do play San Jose. They've got Buffalo, so a couple of winnable games. These games against Vegas and LA will be very low scoring, though, so hopefully if you have Swayman, he gets both of those games, and you can count on some lower scoring event hockey in terms of getting you the goaltending stats. For Chicago, you've got Seattle, LA, and then this back-to-back, but only 1 travel. So they got this road game against St. Louis. They come back home against Philly. That's not terrible. In terms of how weeks go for Chicago, it could be a lot worse. So this is one of the more favorable weeks for Chicago players. So you could go out and pick up a Donato or somebody else. Levshinov just got power play 1 exposure, so he could be on your waiver wire. In terms of LA, they've got a relatively difficult schedule with Minnesota here, although they are banged up, obviously missing some of their top guys, but they are still a relatively tight defensive team. You've got Carolina here on this Saturday. That's going to be a tight, low-scoring game, and Boston isn't a slouch. They are slightly above 500. They're kind of in the playoff picture, but a couple of winnable games here, especially against Chicago here in the middle of the week, so you could do worse than that, and only 2 games on the road. 2 here on the back-to-back are at home, so that's more favorable. If you're looking to front load, like I mentioned earlier in the video, you've got Calgary here with the road back-to-back Toronto and New York. That's a little difficult because they've got to cross customs going from Toronto to New York, so they're going to have a late night Monday into Tuesday and probably not show up that well against the Rangers, but then they play the Devils on Thursday and the Isles on Saturday, so they do get a little bit of a break in between here where there's not a lot of travel in between these Metro Division opponents. But they do have all 4 games on the road. They are playing Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, so it's a little less favorable in that regard. Then you've got Nashville down here at the bottom. Again, kind of the opposite here. They've got St. Louis twice, which is a tough team, but again, it could be worse. They could be playing teams like Dallas or Washington. They get this game at home against the Ducks. They've got 3 of their 4 at home, so that will help them. And Stamkos has started to heat up a little bit. There may be some guys available on your wire that you can get exposure to. In terms of the teams that I'm not touching on here because I don't have space, you've got Buffalo, Philadelphia, and Tampa Bay. Buffalo, all 4 games on the road. Boston, Utah, Minnesota, Winnipeg. So some tough opponents. A backloaded 3 and 4. Just not the best week for Buffalo, though they do have the 4-game week. So if you do want that volume, you're going to get it from Buffalo, but just very difficult opponents. All 4 games on the road with a backloaded 3 and 4 is not the best. Philadelphia, 4 games on the road as well. Tampa Bay, Washington, Dallas, Chicago. So only one easy game and a backloaded 3 and 4 for Philly. So those opponents are not going to give you a lot of offense in terms of Philadelphia. So there's not really a great waiver option there that could potentially get you some hits and blocks. We'll go over a little bit of that. For Tampa Bay, we've got a backloaded 3 and 4 for them as well. Philly, and then on the road, Dallas, Utah, Vegas. So some very difficult opponents there for Tampa, although they are a very good team. And then obviously down here, San Jose, the only team, actually Detroit as well. I forgot to highlight them, but Detroit and San Jose, 2-game weeks. So if you own any of those red hot power play guys in Detroit, you're probably going to want to add some waiver wire options with those 4-game weeks, especially with some light night coverage. I own Patrick Kane, so I'm definitely going to have to do that. But that's going to do it for the look at the schedule. Let's take a look at some of the top teams here, and we'll start with looking at the animated graph for the St. Louis Blues. We're going to notice here that nobody starts out hot and runs with it. You have Kyrou at the top there, but you've got a big bunch of players, a grouping of players that are all potentially fantasy ownable. They're all within a reasonable level of ownership, and they're all reasonably productive. So you've got Kyrou there, Dylan Holloway, Shen, Thomas, Neighbors, Parayko, who's out right now, Buchnevich, Bolduc, Falk, Broberg, Fowler. All of these guys at points you've probably looked at on the waiver wire and thought about adding them. So let's dive into some of these in terms of who's the best options for what you need this week in fantasy. The first thing I notice is that a lot of their guys are very ownable. So there's none of their guys are completely owned up. Even Kyrou and Thomas, if they're available in your shallow league, definitely go and pick them up in a 4-game week. But there are a number of guys that you can find at pretty much every ownership percentage level in whatever league size you need to find something this week. So we'll start it off by looking at the most complete option, which is Dylan Holloway. If you're in a categories league, especially with hits and blocks, and you need to add a little bit of peripheral floor to your files here, you've got Dylan Holloway, 2.09 hits per game. He's not below 83rd percentile in any of these except for blocks. 2.32 shots per game is nice. The only detriment is that he's line 2 and power play 2, but he is dual position eligible, 56% owned. He's not necessarily the hottest, but he's got 5 points in his last 6, 3 goals, 2 assists there. So he is a really decent option heading into the week. And as I was thinking about this earlier today, they play Saturday and Sunday, today and tomorrow, back to back. And then they play the 4-game week next week. So if you're watching this Saturday and it's coming out before 8 o'clock Eastern time, you can go and grab any of these St. Louis guys, and you'll get 2 games this week, Saturday, Sunday, and then 4 games next week. So this is a huge play. If you can find this, one of the guys that I went with was Buchnevich at 47% ownership. He's 3 position eligible, so he's going to help you even more in a week like this. He's line 1, power play 1, and penalty kill 1. He does occasionally get some shorthanded points. 44 points on the year, 11 power play points. Shot volume is a little low. Hits and blocks aren't really there, so he's not anywhere near as complete as a guy like Holloway. But he is going to get you 90th percentile in terms of assists. The shot volume isn't that bad. It's not great, but it's close to 2 shots per game. Power play numbers are pretty good. And the overall point per game is a touch low. He could be a little bit better than this, but 3 points in his last 6. Again, not outstanding, not bad, but that 3 position eligibility on those heavy Thursday, Saturdays, that's going to come in handy. They play Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, so you're going to want him in on Saturday playing against Chicago. So this is going to help you get him into your lineup with that 3 position eligibility. 47% means he might be there for you in a 12-team league, but he might not. And if he's not there and you still want that peripheral floor, you can go and take a look at Braden Shen, 31% owned. The hits are better than anyone we've looked at so far. 91st percentile, 2.47 hits per game. Shot volume is a little bit lower than a guy like Buchnevich. You're getting more hits, lower shot volume. So if you want both, you go out and grab Holloway. If you want a little bit heavier hits coverage, you go out and grab Shen. He's dual position center left wing eligible. 31% owned means he's probably there for you in a 12-team league. And again, the point per game is a little bit low for my taste, 0.61. But he's got 4 points in his last 6, 2 goals, 2 assists, which isn't bad either. So a couple different options depending on what you need. But there's a couple of other guys that are getting it done, and these are deeper league plays. So we can start it off with Toropchenko. You saw that highlight reel end-to-end goal he scored the other night. He's mainly been known for hits. Now, I don't think it shows here, but he's, I think, 1% owned. and he is line 4 with no power play exposure. So that's the detriment to his file. You're mainly getting him for hits, 2.52 hits per game, 4 points in his last 6 games, 2 goals, 2 assists. So in your deep leagues, you could potentially go out and find Toropchenko. I would prefer a guy like Zach Bolduc. So Bolduc, it's not showing up here either, but he's line 3 and power play 1. And I believe he is single digits in terms of ownership percentage. So he's going to be one of your best options. I'm trying to find a view that will show you either the ownership percentage or the line assignment, which doesn't seem to be showing up. But 5 points in his last 6 games, 4 of those are goals. He's been getting a ton of hits volume. On the season, he's 1.41 hits per game, but that seems to be elevated over the last 2 weeks or so. And you can see him popping off here from February 24th all the way up to today. He's had a really nice run of it since the Four Nations ended. Very skilled player, former first-round pick who does hit, and he's getting an opportunity on the first power play unit. So again, single-digit percentage in terms of ownership. If you're in a deep league, this would be the guy I would target. He is dual position eligible as well. I believe it's center left wing dual eligibility. But both of those guys are red hot entering the week. There's a couple of other potential options you can find here. Brandon Saad, this is old data coming in from, I guess the team did not pour it over correctly, but there's a couple of other options. If you're looking for D, obviously Parayko is out, so that's not going to be helpful because usually he's a good hits and blocks option, but you have Cam Fowler here. He's only 16% owned. He is a top pair. He's power play 1 and penalty kill 1. Really good for blocks, 88th percentile in blocks. Shot volume is very low. That's the problem here. The power play numbers are not great. That's mainly because he came over at some point during the season after being injured for a while. So he's only got 4 power play points in 52 games, which isn't crazy. They also do use Justin Falk, but Cam Fowler at 16% ownership to find a power play 1 quarterback. That is very rare. 3 points in his last 5 games. All of those are assists. So you could do a lot worse than this. And there's not that many power play quarterback D available at that percentage. But speaking of Justin Falk, he's another option for you. So the blocks are a little bit lower than a guy like Fowler, but still really good. 85th percentile, 1.16 hits per game. The power play numbers are 80th percentile and therefore better. Shot volume is a little bit better, and the assists are 80th percentile. So D2 and power play 2 for Justin Falk. They do split their units up a little bit, so you could go either of these guys and expect to get some sort of power play production out of them. Falk has 2 points in his last 6, so Fowler is a little bit more active of the two, but both of those guys are worth a shot. You could also look at Philip Broberg, 79th percentile in terms of blocks. Everything else is kind of in that middle range here in the 60s, so maybe not the best option, and he's been trending downward. Of those guys, I would probably prefer a guy like Cam Fowler for this week. But that's going to do it for our look at the St. Louis Blues. Up next, let's turn and look at the Toronto Maple Leafs. Looking at the Maple Leafs animated graph, you get the exact opposite of the Blues. You've got Matthews heading out at the top, and then this group of 4 at the top, the core 4, the guys that you would expect to be way up there. Matthews, really excellent in terms of his completeness rating, and that's why he's that high and well above everybody else. But this is what I've noticed here is Matthew Nyes. So I look back at some of the moves I made earlier. I had picked him up early in the season. It was a weekly stream. I ended up dropping him. If I had held on, that would have been a really nice add. He's been really good, a 95th percentile in terms of goals. We'll look at that as we head to the player hubs, but just wanted to note here that he's relatively close to the core 4 in terms of the guys that you'd want to own in fantasy, and he's way more ownable. And they're using these 5 players on their power play unit, so they don't have a lot of defensive power play 1 options. So we'll get into that as we look at the hubs. But just a word of the wise, as I've looked at some of the moves I've made in the past, it's sometimes better to just hold on to these guys instead of just streaming them for a week. That's a lesson that I've learned this year that I'll be passing on through next year's draft content. But now let's take a look at the player hubs and dive into some of the guys that you can own. Looking at the Leafs on the hub, you see the exact opposite of what you saw with the St. Louis Blues. All of their top guys are owned up almost at 100%. Marner, Nylander, Matthews, all 100. Tavares at 92%. Even Morgan Riley, who's not that great of a fantasy defenseman, at 83% ownership. So that doesn't give you a whole lot of options. If for whatever reason Matthew Nyes is available, definitely go out and grab him. He's at 54% ownership. He's been really good in terms of goal scoring all year long. He's got 24 goals in 61 games, 94th percentile there. 2.33 hits per game is really excellent for a guy like this. 6 points in his last 7, 3 goals, 3 assists. Shooting a little bit high in terms of his shooting percentage. However, he's proven all year that he can be a goal scorer, so that's kind of a manageable range for a goal scorer in that 21-22% range. But he's been really good for goals and hits, gets you some power play exposure, line 1 and power play 1. Now, the key thing here with their line assignments is that power play 1 is now consisting of 5 forwards. It's the core 4 plus Matthew Nyes, so they don't have a power play quarterback defenseman. So in terms of finding value, the only other forward that would maybe be worth a look is a guy like Max Domi, line 1 and power play 2 at only 4% ownership, 4 points in his last 7, 2 goals, 2 assists, shooting pretty low in terms of his percentage, but he doesn't shoot the puck a lot. So that's one of the main detriments to his file. In addition to that, you don't get really any hits or blocks coverage, and the goal totals are relatively low, only 5 goals on the season. However, you may pick up some of those assists if he's playing line 1. That's going to get you some elite exposure. And then with that, power play 2 does have a couple of D on it, and they do have a couple of guys that are available. Domi is also dual position eligible, so that should help if you're looking for that as well, because they do have 2 of these games, the Thursday and the Saturday against the Rangers and the Preds on those heavier nights. So you can get those 2 light night games to start it off at home, and then they go on the road. And it's a little bit of travel, but nothing crazy, not a huge Western trip. So you're looking at a reasonable setup here if you can find some dual position eligibility. Now, if you're looking for D, again, they don't have that power play quarterback available because they're using 5 forwards on that top unit. Morgan Riley is relatively owned up, but they're also, I believe, using Ekman Larson here. So he's been a little disappointing in terms of what he provides. He's on the 3rd pairing, but he is on power play 2. 2 points in his last 7 is not great. Shooting percentage is a little bit low. Only 4 goals on the season. The assist numbers are okay, 79th percentile. Hits, 1.31 hits per game is not bad. About a block per game, that's also not bad, but you could do a lot better than this. And in a 4-game week, you're probably going to look for peripherals more so than you're going to look for power play production. So they do have a bunch of guys good for peripherals. You have Jake McCabe available at 12%, 97th percentile in terms of blocks, 2.05 blocks per game, 1.77 hits per game. He's on the 1st pairing and he's on the 1st penalty kill unit, so that will help as well. Get him those blocks, get those hits for your team. He's at 12%, so he should be available in a 12-team league, maybe even a 14-team league, depending on how astute your other owners are. Chris Tanev coming back off of IR, he becomes an option. I don't believe he has a line assignment because he has been injured, but 7% owned, 100th percentile in blocks, 2.62. That's right around the same range as Trouba. With Trouba, you get a lot more hits, but you always get those blocks with Chris Tanev. If that's the only thing you're looking for this week, he's probably your best option at 7% ownership. Not going to get you pretty much anything else on top of that. So mainly a block specialist. But you also have the option of Brandon Carlo, 3% owned. He's at 1.92 blocks per game, a little bit lower, but he does get some hits. So 1 hit per game or thereabouts. Nothing else there in his file in terms of what you can get out of some offense. But there is Simone Benoit. He's been trending up 2.1 points from week to week. 2 points in his last 7 is nothing crazy, but I think what you're looking at here is the fact that you get a combined hits and blocks D. So of the D that we've looked at, there have obviously been some blocks options. He's one of the best hits and blocks options. 2.77 hits per game, 1.48 blocks per game. He's going to get you those peripherals that you need if you're in a categories league heading into this is probably the first week of your playoffs. So he's your best hits and blocks option for this week because you're getting those 2 light night games to start it off. You're getting a front-loaded 3 and 4. And then if you need to, you can drop him after this game against the Rangers and try to stream somebody else maybe on Pittsburgh for that Friday, Sunday, or somebody else in general to just get 2 games at the end of the week and you make a 5-game week out of it. But not a whole lot of offensive options. We've gone over pretty much all of the defensive options. So let's move it along. Looking at this hub filtered down to just the teams with the 4-game weeks, but I've also added in Columbus and Minnesota. So Columbus plays Monday and they also play that Friday, which is only 1 game. They're one of that game. That game is the only game, obviously. They're playing Pittsburgh, so that's going to factor in. And then Minnesota also plays the Monday, Wednesday front-loaded light nights. So Even in a 3-game week, you could start them with the front-loaded Monday, Wednesday, and then maybe drop one of these guys. But I would hold on to them because they are now starting this stretch of 11 games over the next couple of weeks with 6 light nights, the best schedule from week 22 to week 24. So we're filtering and including them here. Of the options, you have Marco Rossi at the top, 40% owned, 0.8 points per game, 53 points, 21 goals, 32 assists. They're still without Joel Eriksson Ek and Kaprizov. So he's going to get you the top minutes, the top power play time. Only 3 points in his last 7, so nothing crazy there. But line 1, power play 1. Power play numbers are decent, 86 percentile. Offensive metrics are decent as well. Not a lot in terms of peripherals, but he is going to get you that excellent exposure. Line 1, power play 1. He is single position eligible, so that is the only detriment there. Now, a number of other options you have here. Teravainen, we know, is a power play assist merchant. We went over Peterka last week. Ryan Donato, a 3-position eligible player, 38% owned. He's going to get you exposure potentially to Connor Bedard. Line 2, power play 1, 33% ownership, 1.55 hits per game, plus his 2.27 shots per game. Gives him a really nice peripheral floor if you're in a categories league. That positional flexibility will help him get into your lineup. The 3-position eligibility, despite the fact that it is Chicago, they're not the best team. I mentioned earlier in the video, it's not the worst schedule for them. Plus, he's in the ideal shooting range, and he is red hot entering into week 22. 9 points in his last 7 games, 4 goals, 5 assists. So now might be the time to grab Ryan Donato as you enter into week 22. Again, there are a number of other options. We've gone over some of the St. Louis guys, but I just wanted to put them into perspective here and show you where they factor in based on the other available options. Obviously, we should probably talk about Michkov again. He had a really excellent week a couple weeks ago. We featured that here. He's kind of fallen off a little bit since. Only 3 points in his last 7, but he is one of the better offensive options from Philadelphia. I mentioned they have a very difficult schedule just in terms of strength of their opponents this week. Plus, they're all on the road. But line 2, power play 1 for a guy who's a little bit under 50% owned. You could do a lot worse than that. 2.38 shots per game. The goal numbers have been good, 20 goals on the season. It would be nice if he could hit 30. I don't know if he's going to make it there by the end of the year with only about 17 games left. But 15 power play points is really nice. So 89th percentile there, 90th in shots, and he's pretty consistent across the board in all of those offensive metrics. Now, the one guy that I've had my eye on from Columbus, Kent Johnson, is another guy with 3-position eligibility. He's 4 points in his last 6, which is pretty good. Shooting percentage is high, but he is a goal scorer in terms of goals per game. So 21 goals in 51 games, 95th percentile on a per game level, 89th percentile in power play. Shot volume is a little bit low, which is why his shooting percentage is high. But that 3-position eligibility is going to, again, help you in a week like this where you have those heavy Thursday, Saturday matchups. Line 2, power play 1 at 27% is ideal. This is what you're looking for in a week like this. 0.88 points per game means he's got a really high offensive ceiling. But there's another option you could go for out of Columbus. There's actually a bunch of options out of Columbus, but the guy I want to focus on right now is Adam Fantilli. He had the hat trick against my beloved Rangers not that long ago, and they are playing again tonight. I'm recording this on Saturday. He's line 1, power play 1, 34% owned, so a little bit higher ownership percentage, but 6 points in his last 6, including that hat trick, 4 goals, 2 assists. The shot volume is really nice, 2.25, 87th percentile there. Goals are pretty good, 90th percentile. The overall point per game is lower than a guy like Kent Johnson. You're not getting the 3-position eligibility, but you are getting a couple of hits. So 1.35 hits per game, 64th percentile. You could do a lot worse than that. I'm surprised to see his power play numbers so low. Only 4 power play points on the season. I would expect that number to rise. He's on power play 1 now, and they're healthy. They've got pretty much everybody back at this point except for Sean Monahan. So they do have a bunch of weapons for him to work with, Marchenko, Voronkov, etc. So in a week like this where you have 2 light night games from Columbus, including that Friday night game, you could look at a bunch of these Columbus Blue Jackets. There are a couple of other options that we could look at. Zuccarello, this is, again, a longer-term play based on the schedule for Minnesota. 51% ownership is way down from his high earlier in the season. Line 1, power play 1. He's obviously an elite passer, 91st percentile there. Power play numbers are good, 87th percentile. 5 points in his last 7. He's still going to be on that top line and the top power play, even when they get those guys back. So if you're looking for a right winger, he is single position, so that is going to hurt a little bit in a week like this, but it's a multi-week play for a guy like Zuccarello. Even Rossi might lose that spot to Eriksson Ek when he comes back, but Zuccarello more than likely will not. So that's a reason to grab him. I mentioned some exposure to Pastrnak. You can pick up Pavel Zacha, 15% owned. He has been playing occasionally with Pastrnak. He's currently line 1, power play 2. The assist numbers are pretty decent, 85th percentile, and that's what you'd be looking for out of him, trying to get you some pasta exposure. 4 assists last 7 games, 5 points total, so not a huge goal scorer, not a lot of shot volume, not a lot of peripherals, and not elite power play exposure. That's why he's 15% owned. But you could go that route. Another guy I would potentially look at would be Casey Middlestat. I'd have to probably scroll a little bit to find him here because he hasn't had the best season. Only 10% owned, but he's looked a little bit better since coming over to Boston. 4 points in his last 6, ideal shooting percentage range. The power play numbers are good. He's on power play 1, line 2, so 84th percentile in terms of power play, 82nd in assists. You're not getting any real shot volume out of him. No hits or blocks. And he has been trending down for a long time. But with that, if he's going to give you Pastrnak exposure, that would be the main reason to grab him. This would be a shallow league play for me. You're getting a power play 1 guy playing with Pastrnak at 10% ownership. That would be the main reason to grab Casey Middlestat. Now, I don't want to go too involved in this, but we'll take a look at some of the defensive options. There are a couple of guys that we can look at. Pareko's out. Power and Byram I wouldn't necessarily love. Lowry seems to have lost that power play exposure. Darren Radish occasionally does get that power play exposure. I'm not sure how they're treating it right now. He's 11% owned. He's got 6 points in his last 6 games, which is excellent. D3, which is a little bit bad, but power play 1 is the main reason to find exposure from him. 6 points in his last 6 is excellent. A lot of those are assists, 5 assists, so 89th percentile there. But the power play numbers look good, mainly because of that power play 1 exposure. And, you know, the half a point per game is not bad for a guy who's on the third pairing. So a little bit of blocks coverage, not a lot of hits, but you're mainly getting power play assists from him. So in a points league, this is where I would look at Darren Radish at 11% ownership. He might be your best offensive option, especially power play quarterbacks. There are a couple of other options out there for you. We've gone over a couple of the St. Louis guys. Brant Clark, if they're going to look at him on the power play, I don't know if they will. I don't know. They've had Jordan Spence there at points. They've had Drew Doughty there at points. Currently listed D3 power play 2. So maybe not the best line assignment for him, but 91st percentile in blocks. The power play numbers have been decent at times. 81st percentile in assists. But again, as I mentioned before, you're not going to find a lot of power play quarterback guys in this ownership range. So that's where Radish would probably be your best bet. As we start to look at some of these other metrics, we can look at this table at the bottom and try to see some other hits and blocks options. So you've got an option here. Pareko's obviously hurt, but as we scroll down a little bit, you can start to see a little bit more green in terms of guys you can pick up. Guys like Jake Middleton, 1.44 hits, 2.47 blocks, 99th percentile in blocks coverage. So Middleton, 3-game week, but 2 of those are light nights. So that would be one reason to add him if you're looking for that kind of peripheral coverage. We've gone over McCabe. You also have Connor Murphy, who I went to a week or 2 ago, 99th percentile in blocks, 76th percentile in hits. So that's a pretty decent hits and blocks option. And he's going to get you some exposure to Connor Bedard. I believe he's top pair, second pair. So he is going to play with some of those top guys, and he does chip in the occasional point here and there, but mainly a hits and blocks option for you in a 4-game week. And then there's maybe a couple of other guys down here, but nothing too crazy in terms of hits and blocks options. So we've gone over kind of the best ones already. So we'll probably cut it off there. And now let's take a look at the goaltending options. One of the best options over the last couple of weeks has been Scott Wedgwood. 2 games played, 2 wins, 1 goal against, .955 save percentage, and a shutout. This team defense exposure is excellent, 94th percentile for Wedgwood in Colorado. I did see that there was a little bit of an injury scare with Blackwood. I'm not sure the extent of that, but Again, 3 wins in his last 3 games. So this goes back a little bit further. A 917, a shutout, and then a 970 save percentage. This is what we've come to expect out of Wedgwood when he came over to Colorado. He went through a little bit of a dip, as you can see here in his trend. He came up really strong, dipped a little bit, plateaued. There's the Four Nations break in here, and then he kind of skyrockets up over the past little bit. So if for whatever reason they're going to use Wedgwood at any point, he would be a great spot start next week. Obviously, Colorado is a wagon at this point. He would be one of your best backup options. There are a couple of others that you can find. Obviously, we touched on Casey DeSmith last week. He was excellent again. 1 win in 1 game, but 957 save percentage, and he's been doing it for a little while now. I've mentioned him a number of times on the channel as a really excellent backup. He's got 2 wins in his last 2 starts, a 922 save percentage in that span over the last 2 weeks. So whenever they put him in, he seems to do pretty well and perform up to what you would expect in terms of a spot start. So these would be 2 excellent spot start options. I do want to mention one of the starters you can grab. Lucas Dostal seems to have taken the net back over. You can see this slight but steady increase in his rating. The team defense still atrocious, but he's way above expected, 98th percentile. The total save volume is excellent. So if you're in a points league that weighs total saves, this would obviously be a guy you want to look at. And 2 wins in his last 3 starts is excellent. 922 save percentage, 2.67 goals against. They're sort of in a playoff hunt. They're kind of out of it, but they're still making a push. They're still trying to play well. They've kind of found a little bit more of their game recently compared to earlier in the season. So he would be a guy that you could look at in terms of a starter. That would mainly be if Lankinen's out. They've been playing Lankinen in back-to-backs, which is kind of crazy, which is kind of why his numbers don't look that great. I've owned him for the past week or so, and he's been getting a ton of volume. So that's one of the main things to note here. They're not playing around. They have these huge games where they had Quinn Hughes come back for that game against Calgary. They played Lankinen there too. So they're looking to ride Lankinen and whoever else they have in the lineup that is their best option. And he's probably going to be getting a ton of start volume down the stretch. You also have Vejmelka, who we talked about last week. 882 save percentage, not great. 1 win in 3. This is kind of what we saw from him earlier in the season. But again, a starter at 43% ownership is probably what you're going to get. Now, in a 3-game week with a couple of light nights, you have Elvis Merzlikins. If he's available, definitely go grab him. 35% owned. A little bit of a dip last week, though. So no wins in 2 games, 857, which is really bad. You just have to look at this, and he goes down, up, down, up, down, up. Every couple of weeks, he's got a down and then an up stretch. He's down right now. Does he start to bounce back right now in this week where you're going to get 2 light night games? Potentially. So if you want that starter, you can look to Elvis Merzlikins. There is one other guy that we do have to talk about, and I can't believe I bet my entire season on this guy and got a reasonable start out of him. I can't even find him here because he's been that bad. He's been sent to the minors a couple times. I'm talking, of course, about Tristan Jarry, who's 17% owned, and he is kind of taking back the net from Nedeljkovic. You can see here 3 wins in his last 3 games, 2.0 goals against, 941 save percentage. Again, I picked him up kind of as a really desperate goaltending option. I had Nedeljkovic. I needed somebody else. But in the last 3 starts, 967, 946, 917, 29 saves, 35 saves, 33 saves. So total save volume very high. Save percentage has been very good. They're currently playing New Jersey right now. It's a 1-1 game as I'm recording this. He's let in 1, but with that, you're getting a potential starter at 17% owned. Maybe not the best team exposure. You can see the team D at 19%. But that's probably what you're going to look for in terms of this ownership percentage, trying to get a starting goaltender. So Nedeljkovic is technically higher because of his season-long work, but obviously Jarry, the last 3 games, has been lights out good. So this has been something to take note of. You could potentially also look at Peter Mrazek coming over to Detroit. He's gotten a couple of starts in there. I'm not sure how to treat Detroit because they just don't seem to want to win games consistently. He is technically listed as their G1. 23 saves on 26 shots in his first game. He got the win. 28 saves on 31. He didn't win against Carolina. They do play Sunday in the afternoon, and then they got the Tuesday, and then they play Vegas on the 22nd. So a little bit of a difficult stretch here. Vegas, Washington, Vegas. So maybe not the best opponents, but at 11%, getting a potential starter. They don't seem to believe in Talbot anymore at this point. They're going to Mrazek every now and then. So another potential starter you can grab in a week like this where you could potentially get some value in a couple of games. Another spot start option, Dan Vladar. They've got the back-to-back Monday, Tuesday. The second night of that is the Rangers, who have been struggling at times. They just won their first game in their last 5. So this could be the start for Vladar. Dustin Wolf has been excellent at home. Vladar's been up and down. You can see mostly down, but there are occasional bumps where he gets a little bit of a decent runway here and plays relatively well. But overall, not the best option in general, but at 4% against a Rangers team that's desperate for wins, I don't know how much I love it, but the Rangers haven't been scoring all that much lately, so that would be the play there. You also have a back-to-back for Chicago. Spencer Knight is their starter. We went over him last week, but Soderblom will get into a game, and he's been pretty good. So 5.95 above expected. Total save volume is nice there. Obviously not going to get you the wins, but he did put up a 927 in his start last week. So a couple of different options for you. We still have Sam Ersson here. They have a 4-game week. He's another guy who not really below expected, so probably not the best skilled goaltender, but he's getting start volume and getting some wins whenever they do win. The .865 save percentage is bad, but he did win 1 out of 2 last week, so that would be the main reason to grab him, is if you're in a points league and you're looking for those wins and you don't really care that much about save percentage. But with that, there's one other spot start option, Joel Hofer. I thought about this. I believe he's going to play potentially against Anaheim. We'll have to wait and see how it shakes out for next week, but they've got a 4-game week with a back-to-back. The team defense is excellent, 88th percentile. So the .920 save percentage is nice. He just hasn't won in his last 2 games. So that's the only detriment to this. 5% owned. So he probably will be there for you in a spot start opportunity. There are a number of other options, and if you want to play with this yourself and find the exact option that works best for you, you can visit the Patreon link in the description below. But I'm going to cut the video there. Thank you all for watching. I wish you all the best of luck as you head into your playoff weeks. I hope you guys can bring home those championships. And I just want to send a reminder, if you filled out that form at the beginning of the year with your draft results, please come back at the end of the season and put in where you finished. Otherwise, none of that data matters. But just wanted to remind you guys to get out and put that, wherever you finish at the end of the year, add that to the form. I'll send out an email to try to remind you guys. But thank you all for watching. And as always, I'll see you in the next